Now, in honor of the moms, I want to just share with you, if I can, about some of the ladies of the Bible. And I call them heroes of the faith. And we wanted to spend some time in the Old Testament this summer. And so I'm looking in the Old Testament at things that can encourage us as we go through the summer here together. And so I wanted to look at Old Testament especially, special moms that God used in a powerful way. So I do this in honor of you moms to be able to share this with you. And I think we're going to use as a text Matthew chapter 1. Matthew chapter 1. Now there are many great ladies in the Bible. And at the very beginning we have one named Eve. And then we have others along the way. But I'm going to share some of those with you out of the book of Matthew. And there's a genealogy there in Matthew that includes some of these ladies' names. And so I thought that's a good way to look at the Old Testament ladies and how God used them. I can't begin to mention them all. There's literally 180 plus hero women in the Old Testament. And so I can't name them all in one sermon. But I did want to share some of these with you. And beginning at verse 1, the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham begat Isaac, Isaac begat Jacob, and Jacob begat Judah and his brothers, which were how many? 12, that's right. Judah begat Perez and Zerah by Tamar. Perez begat Hezron, and Hezron begat Ram. Ram begat Amminadab, Amminadab begat Nahshon, and Nahshon begat Salmon. Salmon begat Boaz by Rahab, and Boaz begat Obed by Ruth, and Obed begat Jesse. And Jesse, of course, is the father of David, the king. So you have this lineage is meant to teach us that God has always had a plan, and that there would be someone from the house of David, someone from the lineage of Abraham, someone from the lineage of Adam and Eve that would be the Redeemer. And that's the purpose of this lineage, is to show us how God had that ability to use the family, the procreation of the family, to be able to give us a Redeemer born into our race so that he might redeem us. People ask sometimes, well, can a fallen angel be saved? No. And the reason why is the Bible teaches angels don't reproduce, which is why I can't believe some people preach that in the Old Testament, in the book of Genesis, that whenever the sons of God and the daughter of man began to intermingle, that was angels reproducing with women, male angels. Well, the problem is the Bible teaches angels don't reproduce. Angels are male. They're not female, but they're not reproducing males. And so you have a problem there. What you have in the story of Genesis is when the sons of God were intermarrying with the daughters of men, what was happening there is that the unredeemed that didn't want to give their lives to God were flirting with and seducing the women that were godly women that were trying to be right with God, and in order to corrupt this side, Satan used the intermingling of believers with unbelievers, the same thing he does today to our teenagers. He tries to get a believing Christian to marry an unbeliever who's not really committed to the Lord, just so he can destroy both lives. And that's what they did there. So when they intermingled, guess what happens? Same thing that happens when you date a lost person. the good one doesn't overcome the evil, but maybe 1 in 10 times, most of the time, the evil one overcomes the good and pulls them into their sinful lifestyle. And because of that, God had to send the flood, because there were no good people left, because the evil people had intermarried with the good people, and when that happens, both become evil. And God had to judge them. The end result was only one family was still righteous because they still believed in a coming Redeemer. And so you've got to appreciate this, that you had on the ark, you had Noah and his sons and their wives. And so there were godly men and women on the ark, and that's how God preserved it, preserved the human race so that we could have a Redeemer someday and be born again so we could be in heaven. And so I don't know, but I think Mrs. Noah should be one of our heroes. Can you think about that? Imagine a boat as big as this building, and Mrs. Noah was the housekeeper and the meal planner. And everybody worked. Now what happened? We had 2 of every kind of beast and being that there was. But as you well know, some of these tend to procreate. So you would not have 2 chickens very long before you had a roost full. You would not have 2 of anything very long before it would start to multiply. So they had to superintend the birthing, they had to superintend the feeding, they had to superintend the cleanup. Imagine a floating zoo and you had to do the cleanup. You say, well, what did God do with the sons of Noah? Clean up. So everybody was happy when a little over a year later they were able to come off of the boat. And what happened is that now they were like Adam and Eve again, only it was husband and wife and 3 more husbands and their wives, and from that the whole human race generated again. Have you noticed that there have been more discoveries about things that make that possible and true? For example, there are stones in the pyramid in Egypt, in the Great Pyramid, that cannot be moved by any piece of equipment today. They are too large. There's a stone in the Temple Mount that is a third larger than the largest stone of the pyramids. And they moved it there as a foundation for the temple during the time before and during the reign of David and Solomon. How did they do that? We could not do that today. We have no machinery, no lift, no bulldozer, no crane big enough to move those rocks. And they did it back then. Let me tell you, folks, we are the most arrogant generation ever, because we think that we've done bigger things than people of 100 years ago. We think we're important, but we have yet to come even close to the accomplishments of the people of the ancient world, especially the pre-flood world. And after the flood, and I think I think the pyramids were pre-flood, because that's when people were big enough in the other atmosphere with the ability to have the better health and living 900 years. I believe that was when a lot of this stuff was built. But then you've got after the flood, people started dwindling in size down to where we are today, and their brain cells started to die like ours are dead today. And so they weren't as genius as they were, and they weren't as strong as we are not as strong as they were. But one thing that was consistent through all of that is that God used women to keep the race alive. And in the Old Testament, you go back to Eve, you have the most awesome woman who is there, the only perfect woman outside of my wife that has ever existed was Eve. And so she's perfect in every way. And then she, of course, sins. But let me remind you of this. The human race did not fall when Eve sinned. The human race fell when Adam sinned. Eve sinned first, but the human race didn't fall until the man sinned. And so, ladies, it's not your fault. Just look at your husband, blame it all on him, okay? Here you have Eve gets a new name. In her first name is one of importance, but her second name, the mother of all living, is what Adam called her after the fall. Why would you do that? Because he had heard the promise of God that the seed of woman would crush the devil's head. Genesis 3:15. Well, first of all, the seed's not in the woman except in one case, which is a virgin birth. So you have in Genesis 3:15, God declaring a virgin will someday have a child who will crush Satan's head. And Satan knew from that moment that he needed to corrupt the females in the lineage to Jesus. Because if he could get them to either be barren, if they were in the lineage, or if he could get them to be so wicked that God couldn't use them, they were disqualified. If something could be done to break that lineage, then he would win. And so he worked on the men, but he also worked on the women to try to keep that from happening. But God always took advantage of it. For example, Adam and Eve had two boys, Cain and Abel. And people have always said, what happened with that? That God had to pick a third-born son, and the answer is that Satan used used Cain to kill Abel, and because of that sin, Cain was disqualified, and so there was no one to take the lineage to Christ until a third-born child, Seth, came along. And God continued the lineage through Seth. But the heroine in all of that was Eve. Eve and Adam had to teach these boys the truth of what God had told them. They had to talk about the need for sacrifice. That's why Abel knew to do sacrifice instead of Cain, who was giving the works of his hands as an offering to God. Instead of the provision of a lamb that he had nothing to do with but to feed, God taught all of the human race, then a very small number, taught all of the human race, salvation is by sacrifice. It's by my provision of a sacrifice, and the works of your hands will not get you into a redemptive state. It's been the people, even today I hear preachers saying this. You're saved by works in the Old Testament, but you're saved by grace in the New Testament. No one has ever been saved by works. You are saved by grace through faith in a coming Redeemer in the Old Testament. You're saved by grace through faith in a Redeemer who's already come in the New Testament. There is no such thing as salvation by works. First of all, you have to be perfect in nature, and then secondly, you have to preserve that with perfect works. Well, you're born in sin, the Bible teaches. So even if you did good works all of your life and you never sinned, you still couldn't go to heaven because you have a sin nature. You say, well, what's the difference? Well, when you get to heaven, if you've been redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, you will never sin in heaven without temptation. What did Lucifer do? He sinned without temptation. God has never let, why a third of the angels cast out? Because they sinned in heaven without temptation. Actually, some of them might have been tempted by Lucifer, but they had in their nature the willingness to fall, the willingness to take on God and resist God because they wanted the power that God had. And whatever else you say about a lost person, Here's one thing that's always true. They think they're God. Every lost person wants to be in control of their lives rather than give that control to God. And they don't want anything taking that away. Some of them may be proud and some of them may be nervous. But the one thing they have in common is that they want to be God. They want to be in control of their own lives. Sometimes they've been hurt by others who were in control of their life. So they're going to say, I'm not going to trust anybody, not even God. Well, then you can't be saved. But let me tell you something. Our God's a loving God. He's not going to save you to hurt you. He's going to save you to give you everlasting life. He's going to save you to give you a purpose in this life. He's going to save you in order that He might build in you His character. He's going to save you so that when you die, you'll go to heaven instead of hell. He's going to save you and groom you and give you challenges, yes. Give you pain sometimes, yes, but also victories. So that when you are in heaven, you are already prepared by the junk that you went through down here. You are prepared for the great adventure He has in heaven and beyond. Do you really think God is so boring that if you give your life to Him, you go to heaven? That we're just going to lay around on a cloud and pluck a harp? That's not what heaven is. Heaven is full of purpose. Purpose more dynamic than anything you've ever seen on this earth. And we are prepared for it by our adventures here in this earth. And I promise you, when you get to heaven, some of the greatest rewards and some of the greatest adventures we're going to have in heaven are because of faithful women that God used here on this earth. So there's one there, Eve. She's got to be one of our heroines here of the Old Testament. But there's another one in verse 5. Salmon begat Boaz by Rahab, and Boaz begat Obed by Ruth. And Obed begat Jesse, and Jesse begot David. Now, folks, Rahab is in the lineage. She was not a Jewish girl. She was a prostitute. She was serving a pagan deity in Jericho. And God used her to bring the first great victory over a city in the promised land to the Israelites when they came across the Jordan. God used her, and because of that, God placed her in the lineage to Christ. Let me tell you one of the things I love about our church. If a girl or a lady comes in our church and you can tell that she's just right off the street, tough life, promiscuous life, and she's hurting, our ladies will sit by her and encourage her. Some cases invite her to coffee and talk about things with her. We don't look like you have to be this level of the elite before we'll talk to you or before we'll try to minister to you. We'll take you just like you are. And we'll just encourage you and show you some things in the Bible and help you to find God's adventure for your life. That's the kind of ladies we have in our church. And that's the kind of people that had to have surrounded Rahab for her to be part of this powerful story. Not only that, but in verse 5 is Ruth. Ruth was a Moabite girl, and her husband died. She went with her mother-in-law, left the land of Moab, pagan area, left the pagan area, and went back with her mother-in-law to a place just outside of Jerusalem called Bethlehem. So she went back there, and she worked in the fields that were the fields of David the king, and she gleaned, and she survived, and she helped her mother-in-law survive, and she said that she was going to follow the God of her mother-in-law. Her mother-in-law had won her to Jehovah God. As a Gentile, she turned her back on her Moabite false religions, and she gave herself to the living God, who was portrayed in the story of David and in the stories about Jerusalem. And so what a powerful thing that God used her, and Ruth had a grandson, and the great-grandson was a boy named David. Was a boy that was in the lineage to Christ. So you have this powerful woman who is basically willing to be used of the Lord, and she didn't have to be a Hebrew for the Lord to use her. Well, there's some more here that I think are powerful in the story group about this, and awesome people. I can't imagine what it was like to be Sarah in the Old Testament. Abraham wakes up one day and wakes up his wife Sarah and says, we're going to pack up and move. That's enough to get a man killed right there. We're going to move. Where are we moving to? I don't know. It's a long ways off. Okay. Which direction are we going to go? We're going to go west. There's nothing west but desert and a little strip of fertile land above the desert. We're going to go follow that fertile crescent until God tells us to stop. And so Sarah, not only is she following her husband, but she becomes a Bedouin family. Do you know what a Bedouin family is? That's a family that lives in tents in the desert and just takes their sheep and cattle and moves them from one spot to another wherever they can find grass to keep them alive. So when they find a field where they can graze and there's a little water, then they put up their tents and they live in those tents for anywhere from a day to a year. And then they just keep them. So here you've got Sarah walking with her husband all the way across the Fertile Crescent and down into what we call the Holy Land today. They end up all the way over to Egypt. But then they come back and settle in the Holy Land, and that's how God established it as the land of Abraham. Today, our president and others are trying to reestablish a group of agreements called the Abraham Accords. Why are they called the Abraham Accords? Because there's three groups of people in the earth who claim Abraham as their father. The Jewish community claims him as father, and the Christian community claims him as a father of faith. But then also the people of Islam claim Abraham. So if you're going to try to get those people over there to get along, you got to have something in common. The only thing they have in common is Abraham, and therefore Sarah. And God used that because Sarah was so faithful that the end result was that she is also in the lineage to Christ. And on it goes. Ladies, y'all are amazing. You have blessed us. You have given us your lives. It's been said that for a woman to give childbirth, especially in the olden days, which means like 100 years ago when I was born, that she had to go through the valley of the shadow of death to give birth. I know one thing, giving birth can create a lot of noise. You know, there can be raised voices, and there can be folks tending to that need and everything. And my precious wife, in giving us our two children, she had to go through some very difficult ordeals. And, you know, it's just kind of one of those things where you're, as a husband, I feel this way all the time, totally helpless. It's my fault. It's just an amazing thing. I mean, honey, you know, my only thing I could do was like get something to moisten her lips. When our son was born, I got more involved. We went in. We went into the hospital. She was in labor. And they said, we've got one delivery room. This is in McAllister, Oklahoma. We have one delivery room, and it's being used. And you're not quite there, so let's walk. So we're walking all over the hospital. And the pains start coming closer and closer together. And I'm helping her walk, and I feel totally helpless except to help her walk. And then the pains are coming quick. And so she's in the room outside the delivery room, the labor room, and it looks like it's time. They've got her hooked up to an IV. They're ready to wheel her in. But there's a lady that comes in that's in deeper, the contractions are closer together. She gets in front of us, and because of that, they came out and slowed Peggy's contractions down. That's mean. That makes it last longer, and I'm helpless and useless until finally that girl's out there and she has a nice, healthy baby, and they bring us in, and guess what? It's 6 a.m. We've been up all night. She's in there, the doctor comes in, and everything's going really good. Everything is prepped, and she's about ready to give birth, and 6 a.m., shift change. So all the nurses leave the room. Great sense of commitment there. They all leave the room, and the other nurses haven't scrubbed in yet. So there's a 15-minute gap there at 6 to 6:15 where I am the nurse. And the doctor says, this is happening. You need to go over there, open that cabinet with the glass door, and I'll tell you what to get and bring to me. So here I am, assistant to the assistant nurse, going into the cabinet, getting things, bringing it over to the doctor, and about the time the nurses finally get in, Daniel is here. And he weighs 35 pounds. Not quite that, but that's what she told me. It said had to be at least 35 pounds. And so he's crying, and we're all happy and everything. But Peggy is she's very happy about the birth, and the baby's healthy and all of that. But she is the most tired I ever saw her at that moment. And I thought, oh, this is why, ladies, your reward will be great in heaven. Can I say this to wrap up? A lot of births in the Bible, including the birth of Jesus. And the birth of Jesus was not a miracle. The conception of Jesus was a miracle. The birth was just like every birth. And it was probably not easy since this was her first baby for Mary. But ladies, let me just say that there is no way that a man will ever know your perspective on eternal life and the new birth. You have an insight we don't have. We love to be there to attend. We like to help people to come to know Christ and all that. But it's really the Holy Spirit that works in somebody's heart. It's really Jesus that paid the price for the sin. It's God the Father that's the doctor over the whole process. And you and I are privileged to assist by the sharing of our faith. We get to be part of the sharing of the truth of the gospel and watching someone born again with the Holy Trinity overseeing the whole thing. That is our honor to be there. We're called in as the assistant at the last minute, and we're to help this to happen. But the story is the Lord's, and it's Dr. Jesus that makes all of this happen. So I want you, when you think about motherhood, when you think about what God is doing in your family, I want you to realize that God's the one that invented family. God's the one that invented Adam and Eve. He's the one that created manhood and womanhood. And as it's been said, God made Adam out of the dust and the dirt and the mud, and he took Eve from the side of Adam. And it's been said that, God made Adam, and then he said, I can do better than that. He did do better than that. Women, you're more beautiful than we are. You have a higher pain tolerance than we have, obviously. You have a longer lifespan by 6.5 years. You have more beauty, and you have more IQ. There's only one category in which men are superior to women, and that's just brute strength. And that's not true after we go to sleep. The only ones laughing are the ones that have been married a while, but I understand that. So moms, thank you. Because every moment that you live a godly life, you're a reflection of what God has intended for womanhood. And it is the most powerful witness that there can be for a godly mother to lead her children to Christ and to hopefully help lead her grandchildren to Christ and to be an effect upon the young ladies that are in their family and in their church. And that is the power of womanhood. I want you to embrace the fact that you are a powerful force. And while Satan is trying to make that a negative, I want you to know that it is God's choice, that He did something for us with man and woman, with husband and wife, that He didn't do for the angels. They are just one. They never procreate. We have the ability to join hands with God in creating something that wasn't in existence before. Life. I remember my mom. She liked to talk out under the stars. And there wasn't much entertainment where we were. We had 2.5 channels on TV. For those that don't know, a channel is a thing that you turned on a knob on the TV, because we didn't have anything called a remote that was tied to anything called the internet. Okay? For us, the internet was the net inside of the other net. So they spent a lot of time talking because there wouldn't be anything on. And so we'd go outside and sit in a chair and just stare at the stars. And Mom liked to talk about things out under the stars. That's when she talked the most. It's when she had our attention as kids, and we were sitting out in the lawn chairs and staring up at the sky there next to the Paluxy River in Glen Rose, Texas. And I can remember how those special conversations helped me to make some choices in my life. And I can see the times that my wife has had those kind of investing moments in our children when they were growing up. Far more of them than I had as an investment in their lives. Ladies, you are God's greatest creation outside of redemption. God created everything else, and it was beautiful, and God said it's good. And then He created Adam out of dirt, and then He created Eve out of Adam's rib. And she is the most beautiful, powerful thing God ever created, short of redemption itself. And we thank God for you, and that you are influencing and blessing our families and our church. And I want this to be the best Mother's Day you've ever had. I want it to be the best year you've ever had. And so in just a moment, we're going to pray, and we're going to have an invitation. If you're here with your mom, or if you're thinking about your mom, and you need to get anything in your life right with Jesus, Let's make the next 5 minutes happen for her.